Hello again. I'd like to read to you from May 6th from Cloud Devotion. 1 John chapter 4. Let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. The author of The Cloud of Unknowing writes this: The virtue of love grows when you apprentice yourself to Jesus. Do not ask for pleasure. Do not ask for pain. Ask only for God's love. Whether you are in pain or in pleasure really doesn't matter. What matters, and what is God's greatest desire for you, is that you learn to love as Jesus loves. In the virtue of love, God is perfectly loved for God's sake alone. In the virtue of love, learn to love yourself for God's sake alone. Nothing on earth comes above your love for God. As you grow in love, you will learn to love Christ more and more, even turning away from what is most beautiful and sacred on earth in order to commune more fully with God. Today, I'd like to reflect with you upon the contemplative spiritual discipline of solitude. What's beautiful to me on earth is sitting by an alpine lake in Yosemite. Oftentimes when I sit in solitude and reflect upon my life, my mind goes to the edge of Mathis Lake. It's in the Cathedral Range of the Yosemite National Park. And I sit there in my memory and in my mind's eye at the edge of that alpine lake. Mathis Crest is reflected in the mirror of the quiet waters. And I let the day emerge and watch the day begin to dawn, and in silence and solitude, enjoy just some quiet time alone with God in the morning. Now, I love being with people. I love intentional community life, and I really miss that during this time of more physical distancing and isolation. But I also love being alone, withdrawing from society to spend quality time with God in solitude. During this spring 2020 global coronavirus pandemic, we have become more isolated from others due to this stay home and stay lives approach of social distancing or physical distancing to prevent further spread of this disease. This pandemic has caused us to reevaluate and reflect upon what's most important to us, and including how we spend our days with a few others and our days by ourselves. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote about this important balance between community and solitude in his classic short book, Life Together. Trina and I read that book aloud to each other on our honeymoon 38 years ago. Here's what Bonhoeffer writes: Let him who cannot be alone beware of community. Let him who is not in community beware of being alone. Each by itself has profound perils and pitfalls. One who wants fellowship without solitude plunges into the void of words and feelings, and the one who seeks solitude without fellowship perishes in the abyss of vanity, self-infatuation, and despair. Jesus knew the importance of entering intentionally into people's lives. As John tells us in chapter 1 of his gospel, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Jesus steps down out of eternity and comes to be with us, heart to heart, home to home, face to face. But also during his ministry, Jesus often stepped away from community, away from the crowds, and even away from his own disciples to spend intentional quality time alone with his Father in heaven. And he lived and taught the importance of the spiritual discipline of solitude. Here's a couple of scriptures that reflect upon Jesus' life and teaching about solitude. In Matthew 1, verse 12 and 13, we hear about the Spirit of God compelling Jesus to go out into the wilderness, into a solitary place where he was tempted by Satan for 40 days. He was out among wild animals, and the angels took care of him. Mark 1:35 says this: Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. And Jesus invited us, his disciples, his followers, to do the same. Jesus said, let us go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. This is Mark 6:31 and 32. And he said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his disciples didn't even have time to eat. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. Jesus teaches about solitude as well and the importance of uniting it to our prayer life. He says in Matthew 6:6, when you pray, go away by yourself and shut the door behind you and pray to your Father in private. Then your Father who sees everything will reward you. Now, it's good to remember that just a few verses after that teaching, he also teaches us that great prayer, the Lord's Prayer, and it begins with our Father. So we're called to pray in community, but also to pray in solitude. Um, Jesus in Matthew 14 sent his disciples away and went up into the hills by himself to pray, and night fell while he was there alone on a mountainside. He loved going up to high places, and he took three of his disciples, Peter, Peter, James, and John, and led them up to a high mountain where they could be alone from all the others and just have some time with Jesus to be alone, which is a beautiful thing for us today. One day soon afterward, it says Jesus went up onto a mountain to pray. This is Luke 6, verse 12, and he prayed to God all night up on a mountainside in solitude. Oftentimes, Jesus got away to enjoy some time of solitude, but sometimes he just got away from the crowds because they were trying to force him to be something that he could not be. We see that in John 6, verse 15. When Jesus saw that the people were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills by himself. We also see Jesus alone in towns. He sent his disciples into a village in Samaria to go get some food, and he was alone outdoor by this well when this woman came up and he had this amazing conversation. Here's a couple of questions to ask yourself about solitude. The first is, how has the stay home and stay safe movement during this COVID-19 pandemic, how has it changed the way that you view the spiritual discipline of solitude? When you practice solitude, where do you go and when do you practice it? How has solitude helped you grow spiritually? A counter question is, when the Bible tells us it was not good for Adam to be alone, you see that in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, why should we practice solitude as a spiritual discipline? And how has solitude helped reorient your life or refocus your life? Finally, I'd like to talk about a few solitary practices of the spiritual discipline of solitude. First of all is finding a place that is alone from others, a tucked away chair, a bench out in your backyard, a place where you can go walk and be alone. Do you have a place you can go where you can be alone with God and still and quiet? Do you schedule regular time for solitude? During the day, during the week, in any given month, or even each year, a little lengthier time where you can practice the spiritual discipline of solitude. I like to use quiet music for meditation and refocusing, and to help my prayer life to have kind of a background, a like wallpapering to settle my soul and keep me focused during times of solitude. Also, we're all going to get distracted during times of solitude. We're going to be thinking about others and the lists of things that we should be doing and wondering how we're going to be with others. Bring those distractions right into the heart of your time of solitude. Bring them before the Lord and let go of them before His presence when you're alone with God. I think it's a beautiful thing to sit together with a few others and each of you practice the discipline of silence together, even though you're alone in your own prayer life, to not say words, to not offer up prayers, but to enjoy some time of solitude together with others while you silently pray in the same room. That's a beautiful thing to do, even for just a few minutes. And finally, is to practice what Jesus did. Before daybreak, try getting up and going out to a place of solitude where you can enjoy time of refreshment before the Lord. You'll know that I'll be going in my mind's eye to the edge of Mathis Lake up there in Yosemite, and to see that pre-dawn stillness across the lake and say, Lord, may you quiet my heart and help me draw nearer to you. I hope this was encouraging and refreshing to you. God bless you. Praying for you. All right. Bye-bye.